Good evening, guys. I'm back again. So I had a change of mind over the last couple of days, which is part of the reason anyway. I have been busy, but part of the reason why the video wasn't out when I promised it to be out is I decided the subject of today was going to be different. Now, I am going to do a video on the transfer policy after this one, but I got annoyed when I kept hearing people talking about PSR or FFP and people were still getting it wrong as to what the rules were. So I've been hearing that it's a rolling period, that it goes in 3-year cycles, that a club can just turn around and put 100 million, an owner can just turn around and put £100 million into the club, and all these sort of things. Now, while some of those things are correct, there's no context to that. So what I've done over the last couple of days is I have spent hours researching PSR. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a financial expert or anything like that. So it took me a while to find all the rules, go through the Premier League handbook, and get my head around it. Now, for anyone wondering, in the Premier League handbook, you can download the PDF, and the most relevant parts in regards to PSR are on pages 123 up until about 136. There are other points as well where you kind of have to flick through to like page 200 and something if you really want to deep into it, which is obviously why it's taken me so long, and getting my head around it took a while just because of how much research I went into it. Now, I am not going to go into masses of detail, but I'm going to give a general outline, correcting the things that I've heard other YouTubers and stuff like that saying about it. And hopefully that'll help you guys understand the rules. Now, I will caveat this with, while I think I've got my head around it, as I say, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert, I've just spent a good 5 or 6 hours reading through the handbook. So I may have misinterpreted something, and if I have, if people can let me know, that'd be grand. But I'm also going to touch on one or two other small things like parachute payments and stuff like that. Not so much because I've heard things wrong about them recently, but I remember things being said a while ago about the parachute payments in the news and stuff, and what I remember being said is also wrong. I happened across it while I was reading through the Premier League handbook, so I figured I'd bring that up in this video as well. So yeah, thanks for listening to that, guys. Like, subscribe, and we'll get cracked on. So, PSR, profit and sustainability rules, essentially, as most people know it anyway, is a club over a 3-year period can lose £105 million. Now, the first thing with that is, no, you can't lose £105 million. You can lose £15 million. Now, the owners can pump in £90 million over that 3-year period. Now, that's important to remember, especially when you've got people, I know Terry on the Football Terrace, and I'm not going to get on at him, he's a lot bigger than me, he's been doing it a lot longer than I have, but I think he's labouring under a little bit of a misapprehension, or maybe he's just dumbing it down to make a point, which is fair enough, but I've heard him say a lot recently that if, say, someone like Arsenal, who haven't put any money into the club, could go out and put £90 million into the club to go and buy Ivan Toney. Now, while that is technically correct, when you go into the context of it, and this leads on to my other point of this that I've heard a lot of people do wrong as well. Kind of needs explaining before I go into this. It kind of all rolls into one with this. So basically, it is a rolling period of 3 years. It is not a cycle. So you have some people saying out there that you have a free hit of a year where you could spend however much you want and fix it over the next 2 years. Okay? That's a load of crap. You cannot do that. You will never, ever be able to do that. And here's why. So these pens are your years, yeah? So you've got 2 seasons ago, last season, and this season. Now, let's say you spent, well, not even that you've spent. It doesn't matter what you spent in this season, because, no, this is going to get difficult to explain. It does not matter what you spend this season. You could have made 500 million in these 2 seasons. That still caps your loss for 15 million, or 105 if your board put in 90 million. Now, the problem then becomes, so you now lose, so in the first season you made 300 million profit, the second season you made 200 million profit, so that's your 500 mil, and your third season you decide to go out and splash the cash, and you spend 605 million with the board, you know, as in over budget, so you are at your 105 million pound loss. Okay? Now, that's grand. You've spent a shit ton of money. Brilliant. Now, the problem comes is you're fine for this rolling period here. But what happens for the next season is this season no longer counts, and you are now into a new season. So you've got 300 million profit that year, but then you've got a 600 million loss that year. So you have to make up 300 fucking million in this year. Okay? Now, it's just something that I've heard a lot of people say fairly often, and it ticks me off because it is not realistic. You do not have a free hit of a season. So I don't know what most clubs do, but what I imagine they do is go, right, we can lose 5 million in season 1, we can lose 5 mil in season 2, and we can lose 5 mil in season 3. Shit, I shouldn't have chucked my pens. Now, that's good in theory, but if you miss your target in season 1, then you have to make it up in seasons 2 and 3. Now, it's also not quite that simple, because it's rolling. Let me find a pen. I've run out of pens, guys. I've got a spoon and a piece of plastic. Okay? Why the fuck am I doing this? Okay, put that back. Use my e-cig. Okay. Now, it's not quite that simple, because you're always in this middle season, right? Let's just use the imagination. So, you're always in, let's say you're always in the middle season and there's 5 pens. So, we're always in this one. Okay? Now, the problem is, if you've lost 10 mil that season, made it up in this season, then you can lose 5 in that season. But the problem is, because it's always fluctuating, it always changes on the seasons, based off of 10-5-5, you're in losses, you're out of FFP. You're over your FFP or SPR. Okay, but the season before that, you might have been 5 mil under it or whatever. So it is basically all I'm trying to explain is it's not that simple as some people seem to think of. Plan for 3 years. It is realistically a minimum of a 5-year plan, because you not so much plan, but you have to plan with regards to the 2 years before and the 2 years after. Okay, hopefully that made sense. So that's the first part of it. It is rolling. It's not a 3-year cycle where which is how some people seem to think it is, where in these 3 seasons you can lose 15 mil, and then as soon as these 3 seasons are over, they all disappear and you start from scratch. You can spend as much as you want season 1, start making it up in season 2, and start making it up in season 3. That is wrong. Okay? So, that's the first part. Now, that brings me on to what I was saying over what Terry has been saying over on the Football Terrace about that an owner can just pump in £90 million. Now, in theory, yes, they can. But the problem with that theory is that assumes perfect control and nothing at all going wrong in the next 2 years. Because if something goes wrong in the next 2 years, your buffer of, okay, I can put £10 million in to make it so we are not going over PSR has gone, because you can't put that money in anymore. Okay, so while technically is correct, it should we say it's not a financially responsible way of running it. There we are. Because, yes, you can pump it in for £90 million now, but for the next 2 years, you're going to have to be under and under and under, making sure you are well clear of the line in case anything at all goes wrong. And depending on how big your club is and your financial situation, putting that £90 million in and spending it all in one go, whether that's on one player or 5, might mean that you cannot do anything for 2 seasons. Okay, so I would say yes, put 30 million in. That's a more reasonable statement. So if Terry was to say you can put 30 million in, I can get on board with that to a point. Because but yeah, because it also depends then on how much you've put it on in year 1 and year 2. What plans you have for year 4 and 5, because you might have plans that mean that, right, year 4, we have this plan to do this particular thing, and we are going to need to put £50 million in for this plan. Whatever the hell that plan is, new stadium, I don't know. But you might be planning on putting that £50 million into the club. So if you put, that's only leaving you £40 million over the other 2 seasons. See what I mean? It's not quite as simple as they can put in £90 million whenever they want. Okay. So that is point 2. I do want to point out as well that they have now fixed the amortisation loophole. You can only do it over 5 years. I found that in there, so I just wanted to confirm that to people. Amortisation only works over 5 years now. Okay. Now, the next thing that I wanted to cover was Nottingham Forest situation. Now, I've seen some people... Sorry, very thirsty. I've seen some people confused as to why Forest's threshold was lower. Now, let me just read this little bit for you. Okay, so the sum set out in Rule E53 shall be reduced by £22 million for each season covered by the other seasons in which the club was in membership of the Football League. Now, the sum set out in E53 is at £105 million. Technically it's £15 million. But let's say it's £105 million with the £90 million from the owners, right? So basically what this is saying is that for each year that a club has been outside of the Premier League, their threshold is reduced by £22 million. So what that means is, let's assume for this, Forest have put in the £90 million. Don't know whether they have, but let's assume. Now, all that's saying is Forest have been out of the Premier League for however long now, so their threshold is going to be reduced by £44 million. So, to keep it in positives, that's why we're assuming that they've already put in the £90 million. And you kind of have to assume that, because you'd have thought they'd have just put the money in if they hadn't, so that they didn't go over the threshold. So that essentially brings the threshold down to 61 million, not the 105. Have I done my math right? I think that's right. So that is why the threshold is lower. Now, again, this leads into the fact that people are misunderstanding the rules. For some strange reason, people seem to think that new owners have a free hit on PSR, that that clubs who have been promoted have a free hit on PSR. They don't. And what you've got to bear in mind as well is, I think it's something like Championship clubs, on average, lose £15 million a year. Now, if they're losing £15 million a year, and the owner is then making that up, I know the rules are different in the Championship. I do not know what they are. I haven't looked at them closely or anything. So let's just assume that the owner is putting in that £15 million that they are losing on average. That means that Forest might have put £30 million in already. So if you look at it like that, Forest's owner can only put £60 million in their promotion season, which reduces their threshold further if you were originally assuming that they hadn't put any money in when they got promoted. So, so if you knock that 61 million down from by another 30 million, assuming that they were on the average, you can kind of see they can only now lose £31 million. So when you then start to look at the sums of, I don't know the exact figures off the top of my head, but you maybe get £100 million of TV revenue plus surprise money and blah blah blah. So when you start to look at how much Forest spent when they got promoted, you can kind of see how they hit that threshold as well. But no, I haven't really seen anywhere that figure of £22 million being reduced per season for newly promoted clubs. So I just wanted to get that out there as well. So obviously you also have your deductions, your women's football, your youth development side. If I'm honest, I can't remember. I know I read it, and I couldn't find it again when I went to pull out little extracts for doing this video. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but you can also knock those off. So, essentially, the rules of PSR are, if you are not a recently promoted club, you can lose £15 million per year after your £15 million every 3 years on a rolling basis, after your owner has put in £90 million over that 3-year basis. Wait, no. That's a stupid way of wording it. Basically, it is you can lose up to £15 million and your owners can put in £90 million on a 3-year rolling basis, not a cycle. And you can deduct certain things from that. Now, other than the cycle bit, that is fairly well understood. And that's grand. So I just wanted to reiterate the basic principles that most people know are correct. Now, obviously, you then have to deduct for newly promoted clubs. But that is the basics of PSR. Now, I just wanted to touch on parachute payments before I end the video, because I think it was about 2 or 3 seasons ago, there was big news articles that newly promoted clubs who went straight down were now going to lose their parachute payments. Now, I just want to let people know that that is not entirely correct. Now, for this, I'm just going to read it off for you. So, in the first season after being relegated, a sum equivalent of 55% of the club shares will be given as a parachute payment. Second season, 45%, and third season, 20%. Now, this is where I can't remember the figures, but I believe it's somewhere. I can't remember the figures, if I'm completely honest with you. Now, a while ago, like I say, a few years ago, there was news articles, at least as I remember them, saying that newly promoted clubs who get relegated straight away are now losing that parachute payment. That is incorrect. So the next part of the parachute payments thing is, so part 4, a relegated club that was in the that was in the Premier League for only 1 season immediately prior to being relegated will not receive the final fee. So the newly promoted clubs who get relegated, the only parachute payment that they lose are that third one, that 20% one. They still get the 55%. And they still get the 45%. Okay? So, that was just something that I came across that I thought was fairly interesting. Because I might have been misremembering it. But, you know, maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was. If I misremembered it and everyone knew that, I sincerely apologise. Anyway, I'm going to call it there for the night because I am absolutely shattered. Before I filmed the video, I spent about 2.5 hours finishing up my research on this, and to be honest, it was tiring. So yeah, it's around page 132 on the Premier League handbook for anyone who wants to go and read it themselves. Like I say, if there's a lawyer listening, if you want to go and have a look and come back to me with what I've got wrong, please do. Yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button. My next video will be that one on the transfer policy of Newcastle. I do not know when it's going to be. Yeah, it depends. I'll maybe try and get it out at the weekend this time. I'll maybe film it at home. We'll see. I'm not sure. But I will try and get it out for the weekend. If not on the weekend, we'll try and get it out Monday. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys, and I'll catch you next time.